Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. Today, the topic is Covfefe the musical. And I was writing about the experience that I'm having right now. Both of my kids, I have a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they are both now driving my car. And my 16-year-old has her permit. My 18-year-old has his license. He's been driving with his license for a year, but of course we had the whole permit and learning to drive before that. With my 16-year-old, I'm in that phase of things where I'm driving with her and she's doing great, but if you have never taught someone to drive and you live in a city, it's a thing. So I'm in the phase where I am trying to not gasp or, say, watch out, too loudly or, startle her, but also make sure, people in Los Angeles, there's a reason that there's a whole conversation about driving. And there is a thing about people in giant white SUVs tailgating you that I really wish somebody would do some kind of personality study or something, because I do not know what that is, but it's a thing. So I was writing about that experience because my son is a lot taller than I am, and my daughter is maybe a hair shorter than I am. But when I get into my car now, I always have to adjust my mirrors and usually my seat. And it takes a minute because I am very particular. I have to have the mirrors and the seat exactly the way I need them to be. And I kind of like it because I think it's a little reminder about how we're all looking at things from a slightly different vantage point. We're all seeing things from a slightly different perspective. And this is just like a literal manifestation of that figurative reality. And so I like that. I like the little kind of like, oh yeah, this is also how it is for human beings. Everything that we look at, we're all looking at in a slightly different way. We're looking at the same world, but maybe we're bringing different experiences to the mix, different ideas about things. We are perceiving the information maybe in a slightly different way. We're experiencing what's happening based on our own frames of reference. So in some ways, I really like the reminder, and in other ways, it's really painful right now because I'm also aware of the fact, I'm flipping back and forth between the figurative and the literal here, but I'm also very aware of the fact that my children and all of our children are looking out at the same world that we're all looking out at. And right now that is really painful, as a mom, and as just a human being. It is a heartbreaking thing for me to think about all of our kids looking at this situation in the world and realizing, the absolute mess they are inheriting, and the way the grown-ups who are in charge are behaving and what that must feel like, and also just the way the world is so different now. Because I was saying, like, when I when I was a teenager, when I was 16 or 18, I could go through the whole day and not really know what was happening unless I happened to walk by a newsstand and, read the headlines, which I walked a lot in New York City. So, there are newsstands all over the place. But even then, it's like you're reading the headlines and that's like yesterday's news that you're, um, or maybe you wouldn't know unless there was a giant news story. You might not know until that night when you heard the news on the television. You could basically go and have a day at school and be with your friends and not be immersed in everything that's happening in the world. It's just not like that anymore. And no matter what you do as a parent, which, when my kids were little, of course, I was very mindful and, tried to keep them off those screens, and my kids didn't have phones for a long time, all that stuff. I was really careful about what they were taking in and all of that. But there comes a point where, that's not going to happen anymore. And when you have a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old, you're there. Like, that's not going to happen anymore. And it breaks my heart, breaks my heart for them and for all of our kids to be seeing this madness all the time on these devices that they've got with them, and even that is like a thing. I didn't write about this, but there are all these schools now across the country that are like, no cell phones in school. Well, hey, I'm fully in favor of no cell phones out in the classroom during class, 1,000%. If the teacher is speaking and you're in class and learning is supposed to be happening, absolutely. No phone should be out. And if a phone comes out, it should be confiscated. But these schools where they're taking the phones from the kids and leaving them in the office, I am 1,000% not in favor of that, because I have 2 kids who have texted me during lockdowns. And that's the world we live in. So until we're going to make our schools safe and have some kind of sane gun control legislation, don't take my kid's phone. In the bag and out of sight, absolutely. But in the office where they can't reach me if they're scared and there's like potentially an active shooter situation because we are addicted to our, guns here in this country, unlike every other developed country in the world. It only happens here. This is an us problem. This does not happen in other countries. Other countries do not have school shootings and mass shootings every week. That's us. That's all us. So until we solve that, I would like my children to be able to reach me if they are terrified. Yeah. Those poor kids in Uvalde were like calling the police, whispering, calling 911. So, that's where I stand on that. Did not write about that this week, but just couldn't help but say that as I was moving through this conversation about devices. They're seeing all this stuff. They're seeing that. They're very aware of mass shootings and every other thing that is happening in our country and in this world. And not only that, they're seeing the way the grown-ups speak to each other online, the snarky comments, the hateful comments, the way people can't have any kind of nuanced conversation anymore. So imagine being a teenager or a young adult in this situation and knowing that the people in charge are like children. They're like angry, nasty children, and they cannot even... The President of the United States is a name-calling, nasty, small-minded, vindictive. Like, that's where we are. That's who enough people decided to vote for. A person who says he grabs women by the pussy. That's what our, teenagers are having to process. It's devastating. to realize that this is what they're dealing with, and it's hard for adults to process this stuff. So that's like what was on my mind this week as I was thinking about getting into and out of my car and the mirrors. And also like, I like to have my seat back in a pretty upright position. And here's the other thing. Surviving in this situation is really hard for some of us. You know, there are people in this country who I guess are still on board with what's happening, which is really hard for me to comprehend. You know, when we have a president who is now saying things like the Smithsonian should not be focusing on how bad slavery was. It should be focusing on like the brightness of America. Okay. I can't, like, my brain explodes. When that starts to be part of the national conversation, which is what's going to happen when the president is saying things like that. That is exactly what's going to happen. And that's what these people, you know, that's what I started to write about. But in order to get through this, you can't be in a state of constant rage or despair. There's no way to sustain that. And so last week when I was writing, I was like, okay, I cannot like just be in a fury. I've got to cut it. It's almost like if you were making a dish, you know, what can I cut this dish with so there's not too much, it isn't overpowered by, I don't know, like turmeric or something, you know, like what can I cut it with? Or like it's going to be too spicy. Maybe I need to add some cream or something. Like what can I cut the dish with? And last week I went for like nature and poetry. Like I gotta put something in here to give people to hang on to, you know, because I refuse to allow this kind of poison, which is in the water, you know, I'm just not going to let it, I will not allow it to rob us of our joy and our resolve and our understanding that things don't have to be this way. They definitely do not have to be this way. And this week I was like, all right, humor. Like I need to, I gotta laugh. Like here, I can't be in a state of fury to the degree that like, you know, I can't see straight. And so I was thinking about this story that I had kind of forgotten about, but, well, a couple of things. I started thinking about my son with the driving and all of it, you know, and like when you're teaching someone to drive, it's very stressful, especially if you're like mom, I think, because you're not just worrying about making sure your kid is safe and teaching them it's also the people around you in the car and knowing that anybody can do anything at any time. And a lot of people are not paying attention. They're looking at their phones again, or people are stressed right now. So it's like even more dangerous than usual. And with kids, when they're learning to drive, they're very like, what are the rules of the road? And then there's this very sweet, I think, expectation that grownups are going to follow those rules. Like whatever the laws are, there's a 4-stop, you know, there's an intersection with stop signs, like, and you're explaining, well, it's based on who gets there first. You go in order. They're thinking people are going to follow. And then there's that person that's like, definitely not going to follow that. They're just going to go. You know, so you have to kind of like explain, yeah, those are the rules. And then there are going to be the people that decide the rules don't apply to them, just like life. So you've got to be ready, right? You've got to expect that though these are the rules and they do apply to everyone, there are always going to be those people who decide, not me. And that, you know, you can really see people's personalities on the road. And sometimes people have road rage. You know, I can't tell you how many yoga teachers in Los Angeles I've gotten in the car and I'm like, whoa, this person is like, this is not what I expected. This is wild. So I'm not outing anybody, but I'm just saying, sometimes there's a real disconnect going on, or there's something like triggering for somebody in a way that is really dangerous. When you're behind the wheel of a car, this is not a game. It's like your own life is in your hands. Anyone who's riding with you, you have their life in your hands, everyone around you. And then if it's your children driving that you spent all these years trying to keep safe, now they're in a car, it's like, yeah. So, I was talking about my blood pressure, and my son has a lead foot. He does. He likes to go fast. So, I was saying that I think, my blood pressure has certainly gone up since I have been teaching my kids to drive. Some of it having to do with my son's lead foot, but also some of it having to do with like what is happening around us. And then I was talking about how like I have very, very low blood pressure. So at least I have wiggle room, right? Like if my blood pressure's gone up, it's okay, because I have, like, the last time I went to the doctor, the nurse redid my blood pressure 3 times. She put that cuff on me 3 different times because my blood pressure was 83/53. And then she asked me if I felt okay. And I said, "Am I alive?" And she did not laugh. And so I was saying, like, I felt fine. Like, I just have really low blood pressure. And I know this about myself. And like my fingers and toes are freezing a lot of the time in my nose. But I was talking about that experience of saying something, like making a joke, and like no one laughs, and how I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't really do that to someone. Like, I mean, if it's something racist or sexist or offensive, I won't laugh. I will not laugh to save someone from the discomfort of having said something awful. Like, I won't do that. But if it's harmless, like that, I will. I'll like chuckle or make a throat noise or grunt or something. Like I consider it like an act of mercy or kindness or something. I won't just like leave them hanging. And so I was just talking about that experience, and then it got me thinking about other experiences like that in my life. And I've had quite a few of them. And it happens in class sometimes. I'll say something when I'm like teaching a yoga class, and no one will laugh, which is a really funny experience when you're teaching. I'm not a comedian, so it's fine. I'm not there to like, that's not my purpose, right? But sometimes you crack a joke because you can feel people aren't breathing. Like you're doing a balancing pose and people are getting really caught up in whether they're balancing or not. And really what they need to be doing is just breathing. It's just fine. You balance, you don't balance, breathe either way, right? So sometimes you like crack a joke to like break the tension and get people breathing again, laughing again. But sometimes the jokes don't land. And so then I might say like, oh, that one landed like a brick. And then people will laugh, whatever. I don't take it personally is the point. But I was years ago, it just reminded me, I was signing the lease for my old yoga studio in downtown Santa Monica. And it was a really big deal. We had been negotiating this lease for like weeks, and we were finally there to like sign the lease, and we signed a 5-year lease. It was a big deal. And it was like, at the time, my business partner was my now ex-husband, was my then husband. I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter. My son was 2.5 years old. Like, yeah, wild time to open a business. And, it didn't, as with everything in life, it wasn't planned like that. It's like circumstances changed rapidly and unexpectedly, and you either adjust and adapt on the fly or you don't. There wasn't really, it was like the situation I had been in, just all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under me, and it was like sink or swim. So I swam. We found this place and, negotiate the lease. I'm about to have a baby. I have a toddler. We're sitting there, and the property manager says, "Oh, by the way, Morgan Freeman's production company is upstairs from you. If you see him in the courtyard, do not look at him, do not talk to him, don't make eye contact, don't say hello, don't tell anyone that his production company's upstairs, just do not interact in any way." So, I'm like, okay, no problem. And then later in the meeting, the same building manager, he's like, you all can, you can paint the studio, that's fine, but when you leave, you got to paint it white again, if and when you leave. But he's like, but you can't, you can't do anything crazy on the walls. And I say, so no, like, mural of Morgan Freeman with an arrow pointing up then. And no one laughs. Like, literally no one laughs in the room. And I am like the queen of that. Like, I will make, if something like that pops into my head, it's coming out of my mouth there's no like break mechanism of like, this isn't the moment, it's just out. And I remember thinking, like, that's a really bad sign that my husband is not going to like grunt for me or something. Like, you just do that, right? You just like make some kind of like, you don't leave me like hanging here in this room. It's fine. It was, it's just, I think he was stressed and whatever. It's totally fine. But I was making a joke in the essay that like, maybe that's a good like litmus test if you're dating someone, is to just make a really awkward joke at an important moment and see if the person like grunts for you. It's probably like a good little, anyway, I think it's a very human feeling to be kind of like out there, like you've said something and then like no one, just people are just going to like leave you out there with that. And anyway, I was talking about how we can disagree about things like that, like what's funny or what's not funny. We could disagree about like movies. I, for example, really did not enjoy The Revenant. And I know a lot of people loved it. For me, listen, I know, set pieces, amazing. I know the battle scene in one take, amazing. I know technically amazing. I will never forget the neck skin flapping away. I remember the bear's breath on the camera lens. Like, I know. For me, it was just gratuitously violent, and I would really love those 2 hours and 36 minutes of my life back. That's me. We do not have to agree. You might have loved it. Okay, respect it. It's fine. We can disagree. I do not like the sound of music. Sorry. I know for a lot of people that is like it's like saying, you don't like puppies or you don't like chocolate or you don't like rainbows. I just don't. I know for some people, like their favorite film of all time. I think it's a great story. I think if I saw a drama about a nun turned governess turned stepmom of 7, family was grieving and now they're joyful and they escaped the Nazis, I'd be like, this is great. And even the soundtrack separate, the two things just not for me. Absolutely have had so many people look at me like, how can you possibly say that? Musicals in general, like few and far between for me. It's just not, I don't burst into song in my life. Like I don't. But I loved Mary Poppins. So, it's not Julie Andrews. It's not all musicals. And I saw Oklahoma as a kid on Broadway and loved it. So it's like, that whole I contain multitudes thing. Anyway, and I want to talk about Oklahoma a little bit later, not the musical. But we can't, like, those are conversations we can have, right? And hopefully we can like laugh or whatever, like we can still love each other and not agree about like movies or musicals or, but if you want to get into a conversation where you're telling me slavery wasn't that bad, or that's a good message to teach to school-age children that, well, slavery has been around since the beginning of time and you have to consider it in context and it's better than death, no? Then this is not a difference of perspective. You are wrong. You're just wrong. Like that's, and I think what happened this week is I just started to be like, I cannot believe this is a national conversation. This is what's going on now because of this person who is sitting in the Oval Office and saying these horrendous things week after. It's like every day there's something new and horrifying. And so I wanted to explain the Smithsonian, which is what he's talking about. The Smithsonian should not be focusing on how bad slavery was, should focus on the brightness of America. Okay, listen, the Smithsonian is a museum, and museums are there to preserve history so that we can go and see where we've come from, who we've been, where we've been, and how we have arrived at the moment where we find ourselves now. And so that we can learn from what has happened and not repeat the same mistakes moving forward. Different mistakes, of course. We're going to make different mistakes as we evolve, but not the same mistakes. When you start to whitewash history and, act like, listen, I'm white. I was a white little kid learning about slavery. And I talked about this last week. It made me a better human being to learn about that. It made me, of course it made me deeply horrified and uncomfortable. It did not make me hate my country. It made me confused. And it made me want to try to understand what had happened and like why. Now, and then it made me go seek out incredible writers and really learn instead of like getting this. And even then, even when I was a kid, the version we were getting was not real. It's very like, I learned Columbus was a terrific guy. I think, people in Gen X, like we all learned that, and but then you get older and you realize like, he was a terrible human being. He treated people horribly. It's important to know these things. It's important to understand what has happened because it makes you say to yourself, well, like, of course I understand why there are all these inequalities that are baked into our history and our current day situation. And if you are at all confused about that's part of what I was writing about this week, for someone to be saying like slavery wasn't that bad. It's like these people that want to go back to the 1950s clearly do not know what was going on in America in the 1950s, or it isn't pretty. Like the alternative is not pretty. Like if you want to go back to the 1950s, then you don't care about Black people. Like that's it. There's no other. If you think the 1950s in America was this great time and you know what was going on, then you do not want equality or diversity or equity or any of that, and you do not care about Black people. Like, you just need to own that, because that's it. Like, that's the only possibility. Because what was going on, you know, and I'm going to talk about a couple of court cases that I was writing about. So in 1896, there was a court case known as Plessy v. Ferguson. Now, I'm a little bit of a constitutional nerd. I love the Constitution, okay? I still, you know, after everything we're going through, one of the most heartbreaking things for me is that the Constitution is it's completely been violated, and the Supreme Court is now politicized. Like, that is such a heartbreak to me, because there was a moment in time where I think I could have gone into constitutional law. Like, I love it. I think it's such an incredible document. And I think that the way that we, you know, the separation of powers, and there are some really great things at the foundation, but they're not perfect. But if you throw them out the window, this is what you get. And I never thought, I thought people considered certain things here sacred on both sides of the aisle. You know, this two-party system is not working. So there's that too. That's another conversation. But like, I really believed, and I think that's part of what has been so shocking and, you know, heartbreaking to me, but shocking really, is that I really did think that there were more Republicans who would not let the Constitution go out the window. And our checks and balances. And I did not think that. So my bad, I guess. But Plessy v. Ferguson. So in 1890, there was the Separate Car Act of 1890. This is in Louisiana. Okay. And what that was about, these are all the Jim Crow laws. So, again, this is for people who are like, oh, slavery wasn't that bad. Like, it was no, it was, I can't even, you know, that is such an outrageous, horrifying take that I can't even, you know, I literally can't even. And the fact that, like, a person sitting in the Oval Office, that those words are coming out of this person's mouth are so, that should be the only story. But of course, there are like all these, it's a constant. So, you know, not only was it so horrifying, like, it has been an ongoing battle to try to find genuine equality in this country for Black people. Still, now, like, still, it's not like it has ever happened. That's how intense it's been. It is still not where it needs to be, and it never has been. Women, same. We cannot get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified in the Constitution of the United States of America, and it's 2025. Like, don't confuse yourself. This is not like some weird thing we can't accomplish for no reason. It's very intentional. There, you know, you got to really start to, like, look at reality here. These documents, as much as I'm talking about the Constitution and how, you know, incredible I think it is in many ways, the Founding Fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence. All these documents were created for white men with means. Just understand that. White men with means. That's who these documents were. You know, all men are created equal. All white men are created equal. All white men with means. are created equal. Not anybody else. Everyone else has to fight like hell to get theirs. So just don't confuse yourself. Okay, so in Louisiana, and by the way, this is what happens when you leave it to the states, okay? All the states have their different ideas about how to run things. There was a Separate Car Act of 1890, which basically said that there were different railway cars for white people and black people. I want you to try for a second to imagine, especially if you have small children or you love small children, like maybe you're someone's aunt or uncle, or whatever it is, you have a small child in your life and you adore this little person. Imagine for a second, you're somewhere with them and you have to explain, we're not allowed to go into that door. We're not allowed to use that water fountain. We can't go to that movie theater or that restaurant. When we get on this bus, we have to go all the way to the back. We're not allowed to sit in that seat because of the color of our skin. Like, what? I just really want you to think about that for a second. Like, what? How do you do that? Like, how do you do that? I'm thinking about my own kids. Like, if I had to say that to them, like, this is the world we live in. We're not allowed to sit up there. Those people are, we're not. We got to sit back here. We're not allowed to go into that restaurant. I know you're really thirsty, honey. You can't drink out of that water fountain. I mean, that is how people were living, okay? Black people in our country, that's how they were treated. And that's what they had to tell their children. And a lot of the time, they're like working, in a household for a white person. Like, how do you think these kids, what are they supposed to make of that? Okay. So there are all of these, it's not just trains, obviously. It's buses, it's restaurants, hopefully you have seen lots of different, this, right? This about history. There are water fountains and all of that. You understand. Okay. So that's what was going on in the South still. So in, I think it was 1892, I'm pretty sure, is when, Plessy decides, he's going to participate in a planned act of civil disobedience to challenge this law, this Separate Car Act. And sometimes that's what these things were, they were planned acts of civil disobedience that were organized by activists who were trying to, it's like, okay, well, we're supposed to have equality now, but we don't. So let's try to start challenging these laws and actually be able to get on a train or get on a bus or have our children drink out of water. Let's try to see what we can do here. And he was arrested and his case was brought to the Supreme Court, Plessy v. Ferguson, and that was in 1896. And the Supreme Court decided that as long as the accommodations were separate but equal, racial segregation was okay. That's in 1896. So as long as Black people were getting accommodations that were just as good as accommodations being offered to white people, it was fine that they were having, white railway cars and Black railway cars. Okay. So there are people like continuing to, and that separate but equal, that applied to like education, everything, to the schools. So they basically said in Louisiana, like, nope, the Supreme Court is upholding this. They're basically saying, no, in the states where they're doing this separate but equal thing, we're gonna say that's okay. Okay, so cut to I think it was 1954. 1954, Brown v. the Board of Ed, which is a very famous case, very famous Supreme Court case. Basically, 5 different court cases from around the nation were combined for Brown v. the Board of Ed. And what that case was saying was, when you have this racial segregation in the school system, what happens is you are creating a situation where the children who are being sent to schools that are just for Black children, it's not just that the resources being allocated to those schools are not equal to the resources being allocated to the white schools, because of course they weren't. It's also that psychologically, these Black children, they're being made to feel inferior. They're being made to feel less than. You're not allowed to drink from this water fountain. You're not allowed to ride at the front of the bus. You're not allowed to ride at the front of the train. You need to be at this school that's not, it's not funded. There aren't as many teachers. There aren't as many, you're setting these kids up in all these different ways to think white people are better. White people are superior. And they brought psychologists in, and, it was like a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court that was like, yep, we're not doing this anymore. That the separate but equal was inherently unequal. That there was no way to segregate Black people from white people without creating this inequality, this messaging of like, white people are superior, and we're not doing that anymore. And okay, huge win for the civil rights movement. Finally. This is now, like I said, 1954. So the Supreme Court can make a decision. People are going to have their feelings about that, right? They've been fighting this for years. And just because the Supreme Court hands down a decision doesn't mean people's feelings are going to change. So what ends up happening is 12 different governors from 12 southern states, they get together to organize against desegregation. How do we fight this? How do we maintain our segregated schools? What can we do? So while that conversation is happening, we also have people like Daisy Bates, who is in Arkansas, and she is the head of the NAACP chapter there. And so it takes 3 years after this Brown v. the Board of Ed case is decided that, yep, it's time. We're desegregating. We're going to integrate these schools, and that's what we're doing. She picks 9 exceptional Black teenage students from the area in Little Rock. They become known as the Little Rock 9. And she says they're going to go to, I think, Central High School, pretty sure, which had been previously an all-white high school. And, this is widely understood. This is what's going to happen. Major, massive protests. And you've probably seen the photojournalists, there's a lot of documentation of these protests, these white, angry people screaming and yelling and protesting and signs and throwing things at these kids. But, you know, these 9 teenage kids and their families are like, we're doing this. We're going to do it. We're going in. The governor calls in the National Guard to prevent these 9 exceptional Black teenage students from going to school, even though the Supreme Court has told them they may go. The governor of this state calls in the National Guard against 9 exceptional Black teenage students to block their entry. And, you know, like, there's a time where I would have asked myself, what kind of man calls in the National Guard against 9 exceptional Black teenage students? But I think today we know exactly what kind of man does that, because he's in the White House right now. We know exactly what kind of man does that, you know? Secretary of Defense, VP, these are the kind of men that do things like that. Stephen Miller, that's who they are. They're, you know, they've been around forever. They're not new. They're old as time. And history does not look back on them kindly, you know. And I linked, there are photos of the Little Rock Nine and all the people who were protesting. You know, history does not look back kindly on the people who, the men, the people who don't treat children well, who don't treat any marginalized group well. History doesn't think kindly of those people or the people who support them. You know, and I think it's one of the reasons this president is so obsessed with like trying to erase history. But the internet is forever, friends. It's forever, you know. He can try to erase whatever he wants. There are archives. There are people who are, you know, actively saving our history now because he's, you know, actively trying to get rid of it. There's a reason that you want to know about these things. Like, you want to understand what has happened so that, you know, you can do better and be better and care about things that matter. We have a bunch of people running the show right now, and they do want to go back in time. And there was a civil rights era desegregation order still on the books in Louisiana all this time, up until May. Our current president just told the DOJ, just get rid of it. It's, you know, just get rid of it. We don't need that anymore. There are people who are going to tell you it wasn't necessary anymore because the schools have been desegregated for so long. There are a lot of people who are worried about civil rights and everything happening in this country right now who are like extremely concerned. And I'm one of them, because you leave it to the states in this current culture that we're in right now. Yeah, it's not going to be good. You know what's going to happen. I mean, if they have permission to start making their own rules, this is why we have bans, like abortion bans. That's what they did with abortion, right? Roe gets overturned. And there are these no exceptions, not for rape, not for incest, doesn't matter if it's a minor, doesn't matter if it's your stepdad, doesn't matter, you know, no exceptions. Women and girls die. Like, that's what happens when you leave it to the states. These people are not, this is not what the majority of people want. But this is what you're going to get if you know, this is where we are. There's Oklahoma. I said I wanted to talk about Oklahoma. I don't know if you all remember Ryan Walters. He made headlines for 10 seconds, which is all anybody gets anymore because, it's just constant chaos. But he wanted like $3 million. He's the superintendent of schools in Oklahoma. And he's a far, 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 far right, like evangelical, conservative, yeah, white nationalist. And he wanted $3 million for his budget this year so that he could put a Trump Bible in every classroom. Trump Bibles are $60 each, and where are the Epstein files? Like, I can't. Trump Bibles, I can't. Like, where are those? Where are those? Why are those not being released? And why is this man who, is making deals with child sex traffickers, like, Ghislaine Maxwell's now doing bar classes with Real Housewives in Texas, instead of just releasing the files if he's innocent, and he's making Bibles. Like, please, I just can't. Anyway, Ryan Walters, he wanted to put a $60 Trump Bible in every classroom. And he did not get the 3 million, but he's determined to put Bibles in every classroom. He's got the 10 Commandments on every wall. These are public schools. So I want to try, just to be real clear about this, right? Public schools are funded by our tax dollars. The idea being like every child deserves access to a good education. Does every child get access to a good education? Well, because it just depends on where you live and the infrastructure, and if you can even get to your local public school. I mean, if there's clean drinking water, clean air to breathe. I'm thinking of Flint, Michigan. I'm thinking of so many places. But that's the idea, right? You're going to pay taxes, and one of the things you get for that is that there's going to be a local public school, and if you have a child, your child will be able to be enrolled in that local public school. Doesn't matter what religion you are or anything else. You pay taxes, your child gets to go to school. We have separation of church and state for a reason. Separation of church and state. So if a school is being funded by tax dollars, that's a state-funded institution. No church. No church. That's it. No 10 Commandments. Doesn't work like that. Because the people paying taxes in the area might not be Christian. Hi. They might be Jewish. They might be Muslim. They might be anything. They might be atheists. So their children should not have Christianity forced down their throats. Not everyone's Christian. But this man in Oklahoma, he does not care. He does not care. So that's what's happening. There is no separation of church and state for him and his schools. And now in this administration, right, they send out their big, edict to all the school superintendents across the country. You have 10 days to sign this thing that says you're going to stop teaching any DEI classes if you want your funding. That's what happened to all the school superintendents across the country a few months ago, before the budget for the year came in. If you want your federal funding for your public school, that, by the way, we all paid our taxes, it should not be up to them. Then this is what that you can't teach this stuff. Hi, that's state run, that's propaganda, friends. The state is not supposed to tell the schools what's on the curriculum. The government doesn't do that. That's not what's supposed to happen in a democracy or a republic. That's not what happens. That's what happens in a authoritarian country. The government will tell the schools what they're allowed to teach. but that's not supposed to happen in a democracy or a republic. That's not what happens. And this is the party talking about how, oh, these kids are being indoctrinated with this woke ideology. This woke ideology, like, oh, there may be people who pray differently than you or who love differently than you. There might be like houses with 2 moms or 2 dads. Like, that's a problem, you know? That's the world. That's reality, you know, just teaching kids empathy and, you know, but this is a whole other ballgame. And PragerU, they get rid of PBS, which a lot of us grew up on. I would not be the person I am if I hadn't, you know, had Mr. Rogers. Sesame Street, you know, like, PragerU is it's not a university. I cannot say that enough times. It's called PragerU for a reason. They want people to think they're a university. They are not. They're a business. And they're in the business. They're a conservative content creator. That's what they are. And they're pushing ultra conservative ideology. And now they're going to be in the public school system. That's who they're using for their like quote unquote educational videos. I linked one in the essay this week. You really ought to go and take a look, please. I you know, if you have any, you know, I linked it for a reason. It's called like Embracing Your Femininity, I think. And it is horrifying. It is geared toward middle school and high school age girls. And there are so many absolutely just, yeah, it's like this guy talking about how one of God's most beautiful creations is a woman's smile. And why don't you smile and light up the room? And, you know, watch. And there's the blonde woman talking about like, you know, you should really think about what you're wearing and the messages it's sending and have respect for yourself. You don't want to send out the wrong message and, you know, don't show like body parts. And it's that old, like, if something goes wrong, girls, it's your fault because you're sending out the wrong messages. It's not the boy's fault. It's your fault. It's all that. What was she wearing? You should smile. Nothing wrong. You know, it's really good to be a wife and a mom. You know, if you want to have a career, like, you know, that might be right for your family, but it's really good to be a wife and a mom. It's very, yeah. You probably want to go take a look at that. This is who these people are. PragerU is the same company putting out the like Christopher Columbus animation talking about how slavery is, you know, well, you got to consider it in context and like it's better than death, no? Like this is who these people are. This is terrifying. And this is not what we need to be teaching our young children as we wipe out like all evidence of our history in this country. This is not it. So, yeah. So, you know, I think at this point, if you are still having a hard time figuring out which side of history you want to be on, it's like, I don't know what to say anymore. It's, you know, if it's not really clear to you at this point that these are terrible people, I don't know what I can say. If someone talking about like slavery not being that bad, like, then I can't. I really don't know. But I would seriously hope that anyone who I just really hope people start to, at least the people who haven't been engaged, you know, I'm not expecting these diehard people who are like so far in. That was the other thing I was talking about too, is like the redistricting. I forgot to mention that, and I'll be real quick on that. But Texas, this is a kind of huge thing. I don't want to not mention Texas. I wrote about this extensively, but Texas, you know, we had that whole thing over the last few weeks where the president because the midterms are coming, he called Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, and he said, I need you to redraw your maps so I don't lose in the midterms. Make sure you redraw them so that white voters are going to decide who is representing them in these districts. There are, I think it is 38. There are 38 congressional districts in Texas. And I think I'm remembering this correctly. I'm going to look because I don't want to get it wrong. But let me tell you, there are, 60% of Texans are people of color. And the maps now have given white voters the power to vote on 26 of the state's 38 congressional seats. So 60% of Texans are people of color. And now, because of the way they just redrew these maps, that's what this whole thing was about. White voters are going to have the power to vote on 26 of the state's 38 congressional seats. So they just took the power away from Black voters and Hispanic voters in Texas, even though they make up more than half the population, to have fair representation. That's what happened. Totally racist. Like there is no other interpretation, and absolute just like blatant cheating. And just so you understand how things work, in case, you're not like up on the nitty gritty of all this redistricting and when maps get redrawn after the census. When they take the census, right? You get like, what's your race? Like what, how old are you? Whatever. They do that. Now, I'm not talking about when you go to the doctor, when you go to fill out a form. You can certainly say like, choose not to answer. But I'm talking about the census, the Bureau, right? They do that so that they understand who's living where. And then that way they draw in a reasonable state, like we had an independent districting, like map drawing, coalition here in California. That's like what we had decided to do. That's what a reasonable state will do. They'll be like, have an independent, body take a look at the data after the census is taken so they can see like who's living where and who should get to decide like who's representing them. Because you should, if you have, for example, like a majority Black area, you're going to want to have a Black representative in there representing your needs, your interests, what your community wants, your district. Like you're going to want someone from your district, speaking to your needs. That's the whole point of representation. It doesn't necessarily, maybe it won't be somebody who's the same race, but you're going to want to have power over who it is. You're going to want somebody else from 3 neighborhoods over or miles away deciding who's going to represent you over here. Screw that. It's like you get to decide. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how representation works. You get to decide, hey, we live in this area, we know what our problems are, and we know who is stepping up for us. That's the person we want to send to Washington, or to the state capitol, depending on what you're talking about here. But now it's like, no, you guys over there, you don't get to do that. We're going to decide who's going to represent, quote unquote, your interests. Wink, wink. It's disgusting. Okay, it's disgusting. So that's what just happened. Now, it is so gross. What was supposed to happen, the next census, the last census in Texas happened in 2020. Try to say that 5 times fast. So the results didn't come back until 2021. The next census was not supposed to happen until 2030. And that's when the maps were supposed to be redrawn. But because our president called Greg Abbott and said, redraw them now and redraw them in my favor, that is what happened. Now, the Texas Democrats, I'm sure you heard the story, they left the state. They broke quorum. Quorum is a certain number of representatives have to be present in the governing body in order for official, business to take place. And breaking quorum is a completely legal tool. There's nothing illegal about it. They're allowed to break quorum. Yes, they can be fined, whatever. They knew that. They did it anyway. A lot of these people are like, they're not big players. They're representing like small communities. They freaking took off as an act of resistance. And, God bless Governor Pritzker, he brought people, like, come here, I'll take care of you. I'll put you up in hotels, just come here. If you need a place to stay, we'll work it out for you. A lot of people did that, like New York, like people, these Democrats were taken care of, which is great. This is good. It was at least people fighting back and saying, that's not okay. And these Texas Democrats, they did that because they were like, no, this is like disgusting what you all are trying to do. This isn't right. I'm supposed to be representing my district. I don't want to agree to these maps, like, so you can cheat openly in broad daylight. I'm going to leave. They couldn't stop it, but they could slow it down. That's what they did. Okay. They come back Monday, past Monday, and the Texas Republicans are like, you can't leave the Capitol now because you did what you did. They were all fined like $500 a day or whatever. So now if you want to leave at the end of the day, you have to sign permission slips to have Texas law enforcement follow you everywhere because we want to make sure you come back Wednesday so we can, get our maps pushed through. And I think a lot of these Democrats at first signed because they were like, this is insane. Permission slips. Like, what? Like, I have to have a law enforcement following me to the grocery store, the gym, to pick up my kid, to, stand outside while I'm home. This is like so bizarre. And there's no authority. That's not like a thing that happens. Okay. If you break quorum and you come back, now you have to sign it. No, that's not normal. This is like bizarre. Okay. But I think these Texas Republicans were like, well, who's going to stop us? Like, the governor's behind us. The president is behind us. Like, no one's going to stop us. So we're going to like punish them now. We're going to teach them a lesson and treat them like children. And they're going to have to sign permission slips. And Nicole Collier, she's like, no, I'm not going to sign that. I'm not signing that. It's not that she staged a sit-in. It's that as a grown woman, she was like, I don't think I should sign a permission slip, period, to allow law enforcement to follow me around. I think that's demeaning, and I'm not going to do it. And she didn't do it. That is some heroic stuff right there. That's an act of resistance. And, I hope she sues the pants off the I love her. I hope she goes and goes and goes. That's the kind of representation you want. That's the kind of fire you want from someone. That's the kind of self-respect, people who understand like what is okay and what is not okay ought to have, and once again, Black women like leading the charge, and then other Democrats came back and they ripped up their permission slips and were like, okay, wait, we're just going to stay with you. You're right. This is ridiculous, So there are things that are happening that are, there are some reasons to have some hope. There are people who are saying no. My governor, Gavin Newsom, is one of them. Now, listen, it's once again, I was talking to someone who said, the one thing about like the left is the purity test thing. It's like, I thought his podcast it's like, yeah, you want to sit down and talk to people who believe differently. That's great. Charlie Kirk? Absolutely not. I don't want to hear that. That person does not deserve to be normalized. So, yeah, no, totally, absolutely not. Like in my perception, just completely abandoning transgender people, like that was really not the move. Very disappointing. Very disappointing. There's a whole AI thing that he did that I am fully not on board with at all. So I have issues. It's not like I'm all like, woo. However, I love two things big time. His social media, giving it back to them. This whole, the Trump tweets back in his face because of Camille Zapata, I think her name is leading his social media campaign. Brilliant. She's like 29, Latina. I think she identifies as queer, like all the things this president can't stand, which I freaking love I just love this, is running this brilliant trolling campaign against him. And all it is really is just tweeting back at him, just Newsom tweeting back at him the way he tweets, these insane, egotistical, just the most like, I'm amazing, I'm handsome, I'm the best ever, my maps are the greatest, your tiny hands this, like just giving him back what he has been dishing out for 10 years. And it is like, it's wild what's happening. Like everyone on Fox News is like, Gavin Newsom, like he's really making a fool of himself. Like, he's tweeting this way. And like, if he wants to be president, he's got to be a lot more serious. Like your guy who is currently president is tweeting like that all the time. Take his phone away. I don't know what you're talking about right now. All they're doing is just showing everyone how outrageous and embarrassing it is to have a president who tweets like that. And I love it. I'm here for it. I'm here all the way for it. I love every single one of those tweets. I love his Nobel Peace Prize, the whole thing, the maps, all of it. It's like, keep it coming all the way. And what he said is, if Texas bends the knee to Trump and cheats this way and gains themselves 5 more congressional seats that are going to go to Trump, basically, right? That's what happened. They're Republican, they're so he can win in all these different districts. Then we're going to do that. We're going to do the same thing in California. We wouldn't have done it, but if they do that, we are going to clap back. We are not going to sit back as they cheat openly in broad daylight. They didn't hide it. They're like, yeah, we're doing it for political partisan reasons so that we don't lose in the midterms. Like they're out there with it. They're not trying to hide it. So Governor Newsom's like, if that's what you are all going to do, yeah, we're not going to sit back here. We are the largest state. We're going to redraw our maps then. Like we're not, and as we should. Like it is enough now. I do not think this 2-party system is working. I think we need a whole new, we need to rethink everything here, but we're not in that conversation right now. We don't have time for that conversation right now. That's not a conversation we can have right now. Nor is like a thing about, oh, I don't like Newsom. Just be quiet right now. Just stop that. Just don't do that right now. That's not helpful. And it doesn't matter because we're not talking about like the presidency right now. What we're talking about is fighting back and, doing something tangible to fight back and try to, retain some measure of like our democratic republic here. So they don't just tear through it and retain power and get rid of any possibility of ever, getting these people out. These people need to go. They need to go. So I am all for it. Like, yes. And I hope every blue state that can does the same thing. And we, if that's what they're going to do, they're going to cheat, then we need to meet them on that field. Sadly, I think it's disgusting and unfortunate, but you can't be like, well, they're not playing by the rules. That's really bad. Listen, this whole system is just, forget that, we need a do-over. We need a do-over where people are treated with dignity. All people are treated with dignity in this country, and we're so far from that right now. So that's a separate conversation we definitely absolutely need to have. But right now it's like crisis moment. So just get excited every chance you get, and try to welcome more people. The people that are sitting on the sidelines, try to wake them up, let them know, hey, these people, they think slavery's not so bad. They think women should smile more. Hey, you should wake up and see who these people are. If you're not engaged because you're out there getting your kombucha, please pay attention. If you care about women and Black people and queer people and, transgender people and any marginalized group in this entire country, if you care about them at all, please wake up. Please. We need you. We need you to wake up. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to send you my love and wish you laughter. Definitely do not, I know it's really hard, and I know that a lot of this news is really dark and difficult and painful. I know that. I know there are a lot of people feeling scared, and do not let them rob you of your resolve, of your joy, of your laughter. Reach out to your friends, see how you can get involved, do every last thing. Costco, deciding not to carry, send an email, write a letter, do every last thing. Etsy was carrying alligator Alcatraz merch, send an email, send a letter, do all the things. Every time you see there's a way to resist or do something. That judge in the Mason Lee Gibson case, I sent him the most scathing letter I've ever written in my entire life. Do things. It will make you feel better. The CEO from Target is stepping down. Is it good enough? No, but it's something's happening there because sales are down. So the boycott is working. Don't despair. Keep going. Keep looking for ways to resist, to make your voice heard, to make your feelings known, even if it's just amongst your friends who are maybe not really sure how to get and just start having conversations if you can, or send them an essay if you like it and you're hey, I read this, I thought maybe you might find it interesting. I don't know. But don't give up. Don't give up. I'm not out of hope. I'm not out of hope. We can't lose. We cannot give up and throw in the towel. All the kids are watching, and they need to see people who are sane and who care and who are trying. So be one of those people, right? Okay. Until next time.